are still being felt. Worst hit was Northampton, where the River Nen overflowed into the streets, pouring 5 feet of floodwater into homes, causing £100 million worth of damage. 7 months on, Northampton remains a town in trauma, living with the constant fear that it could happen again.
There will always be a next flood of an extreme nature. We don't know where and we don't know when, but it's certain that there will be one.
Hundreds of families are still unable to return to their homes in Northampton, facing a bleak Christmas in rented accommodation. Some will never go back.
Well, we had about 2,500 properties, both here in Far Cotton and St James. That equates to about 7,000 plus people. 2 people died. We know that more have died since, and they've perhaps been forgotten. It may have been heart failure or hypothermia or some other reason on the death certificate. But the reality is that they died because of what happened here at Easter. The few days after the floods will probably live with me for the rest of the time. I'm too young to remember the devastation of the war years and that sort of disaster. Walking around Far Cotton and St James in Northampton the day after the flood, you had a situation where windows had been smashed because of the force of the floodwater. Doors had been pushed in. There was no electricity, no street lamps, and I went round late at night and there was an eerie silence. You could hear a dog barking or perhaps a radio playing, but there was just sheer destruction.
The water height was probably about here.
To watch your furniture float down into your living room is devastating.
The water came up through the plug hole in the bath. It came up through the toilet. It was just disgusting.
I can't get out of my house. What am I going to do? Am I going to drown? Am I going to die?
Just scream. Oh, just said, quick, we couldn't do nothing. We couldn't get out, you see.
You work so hard getting your house just right, the way you want it, and then within seconds it's just destroyed by water and that lot, and it's just gone down the drain, washed away. That is really heartbreaking.
For those who decided to stay in their flood-ravaged homes rather than seek temporary accommodation elsewhere, it's meant months of misery.
This is what's left of our living room. As you can see, there's not a lot. Got cracks up the wall. That's our office area. We've got no storage. The mates have brought these around for me, otherwise I wouldn't have had nowhere to sit. Got nowhere to put anything, so it all goes down on the floor. Then you come out in the kitchen, rip some units off already, so we haven't got much storage space. Not much room.
7 months on, over half the residents are still not back in their own homes. Disputes over insurance claims and a huge backlog of building work have resulted in long delays.
County, time to get up.
Since the floods, Tony and Denise Kirkland have been sleeping on the floor of their tiny rented flat above a florist's. Their children have suffered nightmares and poor health, and Tony had to take 6 weeks off work through stress. The cramped conditions don't help.
We literally live in this room. We haven't got a garden, and there's just no room for the children to play properly. They've lost so much space.
I might be here.
Initially, we were staying with friends. She put us up on her living room floor for about 4 or 5 weeks because we just couldn't find anywhere to live. 2,500 homes affected in Northampton. Everybody was looking for somewhere to rent. Just by chance, we found this place because friends of ours were going to take the place but felt it was too small for them. We just felt beggars can't be choosers, so we took it. It's a roof over our heads.
Tony Kirkland is typical of many. He and his family won't be able to move back home till after Christmas. They sacked one builder, then a second had to rip out all the fittings and start again from scratch. It's meant months of delays.
Hiya, how you doing? All right?
Not too bad.
Good.
They're cracking on, aren't they?
Yeah, they're doing well, yeah. So we're getting on well this week. We're plastering, and we should have to be finishing the plastering next week.
Yeah.
We've got all your electrics first fix, your plumbing's first fix. Yeah, I say in next week, be all plastered, ready for second fixing. So things are going good, yeah.
Yeah.
In the meantime, storage space is a big problem.
It's my son's bedroom. As you can see, we're having to store items we purchased to replace ones we lost, because everyone else is like a building site. And in our bedroom, we've got to take a delivery of the new kitchen to replace one we lost. The existing kitchen was about £4,000. We're still paying off the loan. We've still got another 3 years to pay off on the loan. And actually, we didn't get the full value of the kitchen from the insurance company, even though we were covered. And this kitchen should be hopefully being fitted in a few weeks' time. The building side of work actually cost about near enough £30,000. And then the contents, you're probably looking at another £15,000 in total.
With 2,500 houses in need of urgent repairs, Northampton didn't have enough builders to meet the demand. 3/4 of the firms working here are from out of town. Paul Duckett's builders are from Manchester.
I remember speaking to the builders about a month after the flood, and they said, don't worry, we'll have you, be about 3 months, all in all, 6 weeks to dry out, 6 weeks to sort everything out. Which, at that sort of stage, you think, well, 3 months is a long while, but it's okay. 7 months on, things are just, you're not making progress, you're going backwards. My plaster's been taken off the walls 3 times, it's blown. The stairs have been ripped out twice because they keep putting the wrong lengths in. It's just one thing after another, they keep compounding. And you get more and more, well, I keep using the word desperate, but it is, you feel helpless, you feel desperate, annoyed and angry that these people can't pull their act together. From my point of view and the residents' point of view, we don't want excuses and reasons, we want results.
We've had good builders, and I mean we've had very, very good builders, but we've had bad builders as well, and the bad ones have been very, very bad. The sort that you would imagine were tying up their horses outside somebody's house, that type of builder. So I think, you know, in the main, the standard of work from those bad ones has been appalling. I've heard of one case where somebody's actually moved back into their house, and the surveyors come round and condemned the whole lot, and they've had to move back out again.
We've heard of some people that took on 20, then 30, then 50, and we've heard of one guy's took on 100 houses, and up until 6 weeks he hadn't finished any of them. Well, that's a lot of unhappy people there.
For Tracy and Martin Shaw, today's a big day.
What do you reckon then? Did it last night, finished it off?
Yeah, looks good, doesn't it?
Their new carpet's being laid, and after months of delays, they're preparing to return home. But like many other flood victims, they're highly critical of the way they've been treated by insurance companies.
And the frustration is actually getting the work done and dealing with the insurers, the loss adjusters, who treat you like a piece of dirt. They make you feel like you're doing them. Now all I'm trying to do is get my life back in order. You're constantly battling with these people, and they are so annoying and assholes that it is just, it really riles you. It's really got my temper up, and it stressed me out totally.
It seems as if it's never ending. You know, you go from insurance problems, building problems, delivery problems.
That's right. I mean, we've had carpets delivered and they've been the wrong carpets that we've ordered. So they've had to go back.
Yeah.
And then eventually they've brought us the right carpet. No, and then we had problems with the builders.
Other flood victims blame the government for failing to help in the crisis.
They just don't seem to care. Being a Labour Party, you'd think they would care, but they don't. They're just not interested in us.
They send lots of foreign aid money to China and abroad, and we're 60 miles up the M1, and they've done nothing for us. We just feel forgotten and neglected.
So what's the target, Christmas?
Well, we won't be finished for Christmas, no way. No. It's a lot. You can't put 16 years back into an house in even 12 months. You can't do it.
Oh, you're getting big, aren't you? So what's it like going back in your house? Is it good?
Finished.
Finished, is it? That's good. Can you play with your toys again? Can you?
The Reverend Barbara Prowse, who runs the St James Preschool Playgroup, has seen how the community has suffered.
I bet your daddy's pleased you're back as well, isn't he? Yeah. Did you?
I know people who are very stressed in their relationships and have told me that. And I know of people who don't want to go home again, even though they own the houses, you know, because the memories are so frightening. I think that a lot of the elderly people probably won't ever come back because it's taken so long for their flats to be done. I do know some who've come back, obviously, but some of them went into care and some of them will stay there. I've taken quite a few funerals of people who have died since the flood. And though you can't say the flood contributed to that, we have no doubt that it is so, because the shock to people. I mean, I did the funeral of a lady with osteoarthritis who was soaking wet, and she just gave up after that.
Local businesses have also been struggling to survive. As thousands of residents were forced to move out of the area, shop takings plummeted. Some shutters will stay down. Jack Poole runs a furniture shop in St Leonard's Road, one of the streets worst affected.
Families were moved away from these areas to areas all around the county. I mean, the whole area looked like a ghost town. 7 months on and still you've got attractor businesses such as our chemists, they're still not open. The hairdressers next door, that's shut now. I suppose up to 60% of the people are still not back in their homes. So obviously this has a tremendous impact on our businesses.
Well, we were out of business for about 6 weeks, generally. They've now been refitting the shop, and we've tried to manage up here with about 4 chairs, as against sort of 9 or 10 downstairs. Well, it must have halved our business at least. I have records of that, obviously, for our insurance companies. But most of the houses are still not lived in.
132, please.
Lost loads of customers. Our takings are down £1,000 a week, more sometimes.
It won't go away.
I'm sure it'll be next year until we get back to normal. I'd say, I don't know, June time. I really don't know if it gets back to normal.
As the floodwaters receded, anger grew. Residents complained the first they knew about the floods was when water poured into their homes in the middle of the night. A report this week by the Borough Council blames the Environment Agency for being caught out and for allowing the town's flood defences to be breached in such a disastrous way.
Here we have a flood defence wall to protect Northampton from flooding. At Easter, the water never came over the top of this flood wall. The water came through the gaps in our flood defences. We had gaps of 15 metres, 25 metres and 95 metres. When you realise that the Environment Agency knew about these gaps, and they knew about them in 1994 from an asset survey that they themselves carried out, and they did absolutely nothing about it. That's the reason why Northampton got flooded, because the water came through the gaps and not over our flood defences. Here we have the Grand Union Canal. Over there we have the River Nen. The water flowed out of the River Nen, into the canal, out of the canal, across this bank by 8 inches. Then it flowed down here, across the field here. What we should have had here to prevent Far Cotton flooding was a clay bank of 1 metre high, which would have prevented the water actually entering Far Cotton and entering the homes of the residents that live there.
Well, at Easter, we did have a severe weather event. The rainfall was incredible. But on top of all of that, we know that the sluice gates, such as the one behind us, were not working properly. They were being maintained, so they couldn't operate them correctly. We had a reservoir that was full and couldn't take any more water. We had rainwater channels blocked and huge gaps in the flood defences, as we've seen. And so you add all those together and you end up in a situation where even Peter Bine, the independent review, said that the severity, intensity and the depth of the flood was caused by those errors. And they were human errors. They were errors that could have been avoided.
As far as the residents are concerned around here, the Environment Agency has overall supervision for our flood defences. They're responsible to make sure that our flood defences on that night were in good order, in good working order, that the walls were in place, that banks were in place, and they failed in that supervision. They didn't supervise our flood defences. They also have the authority to order people to put back our flood defences, the ones that were missing. They failed to do that. So I think at the end of the day, it's the Environment Agency that should put their hands up, and the Environment Agency as a body should apologise to the residents of Northampton.
We've always felt that this culture of wanting to find somebody to blame is quite inappropriate for an event of the century which overwhelmed the infrastructure and resources of all the agencies that are involved in predicting it and subsequently reacting to it. In general, though there were some weak points in the defences in Northampton, not, I would add, in defences owned or maintained by the agency, but in defences owned and maintained by others. But when the flood came, it was so large that it overwhelmed all the defences and would have done so whatever.
The greatest fear of all in Northampton is that it could happen again. £39 million of government regeneration money is being pumped into the town to provide new development on so-called brownfield sites, most of which are within the natural floodplain of the river and highly vulnerable. As part of one controversial scheme, 800 new homes could be built in the area. At St Ives in Cambridgeshire, another area badly hit at Easter, new homes are being built on flood meadows, and hundreds more are planned on floodplains all over the region, a move condemned by experts as asking for trouble.
50 years ago, the floodplains on English rivers were relatively undeveloped. Most of our towns were built on higher land away from flood risk. More recently, we've become more ambitious, fighting nature, trying to develop onto these floodplain areas with urbanization, with industrial development and so on. Equally, we built more houses, more towns with concrete. This has stopped the water soaking into the ground. The consequence of that is we've got increased levels of runoff into our rivers and creating more levels, higher flood levels downstream. I see further development on floodplains as being a nightmare scenario. The reason being is that we should prevent all new developments in flood-prone areas, full stop.
I think as far as development's concerned, it's more about the mistakes that were made in the 50s and 60s rather than just what's happening now. And the reality is that we have to support brownfield site development, but we must make sure that it adds to the flood defence and doesn't weaken it.
You and I as taxpayers are actually paying for all this flood defence work. We are paying for, I think, the mistakes made by the planning authority in allowing development on flood-prone areas, because that is a hostage to fortune, because in future there are going to be problems of flooding at those sites. Insurance is either going to have to cover it, or in the future some flood alleviation scheme. And we all suffer.
Climatologists predict that in the next century, global warming will increase temperatures by up to 3 degrees, triggering much heavier falls of rain.
The increases in rainfall that we anticipate in the future will affect the whole of the UK. And even though here in East Anglia we are the driest part of the UK, nevertheless we still anticipate that winter rainfall events are going to become more intense. So that means that river catchments even here in East Anglia are going to have to cope with faster and larger amounts of water. I think it's very important planners do not think that the future is going to be like the past. Future climate is going to be different from what we've experienced, and therefore the statistics that flood defences or planning regulations are based upon are not going to be the statistics that will prevail in the future. Planners need to take into account the sort of climate change scenarios that we are creating in order to change their perception of what these risks are going to be.
Many flood control experts believe what's needed is tougher legislation to give the Environment Agency power to stop development in flood-prone areas.
If we are going to continue building on our floodplains without raising the protection levels at sites downstream, then potentially, yes, we are going to have a disaster on our hands, because the 50-year level of protection that, say, we had been providing at a town is now going to be overtopped by the 25-year return period flood. So it's going to be flooding twice as often, twice as much misery.
Good afternoon, Environment Agency. Can I help you?
At the Environment Agency Control Centre in Peterborough, all's quiet today. Round the clock, they monitor river levels and keep their fingers crossed that the Great Flood of '98 won't be repeated during their lifetime.
Agency, can I help you?
And they're not the only ones.
Yeah?
It doesn't really matter what anyone says. Nobody here believes that this is the end of it. And that is terrifying, actually, because if this area flooded again, I don't think anyone would come back.
No, there are no flood warnings at the moment for Northampton. But if you'd like to call our Environment Agency flood call line...
There's a satellite picture from earlier this morning. You can see the swirl of cloud around the low pressure. That's produced all the strong winds, and it's been driving those bands of rain from west to east across Britain today.
When rain falls, anxiety rises. Flood victims ask if what happened at Easter could happen again.
Yes, indeed it could. There will always be a next flood of an extreme nature. We don't know where and we don't know when, but it's certain that there will be one. And the country will never be able to afford to build flood defences to guard against all eventualities everywhere, however extreme.
Even though I may be confident in a few months' time in our flood defences, one town's flood defences is another town's flood. Because if we survive, the water's only going to be washed downstream. And if people in Peterborough or out towards the Wash or Ipswich or Norwich haven't checked their flood defences, then the water's got to get out somewhere.
If we had another rainfall like we did have over the Easter period, there will be riots, I can tell you. I will fight them until they get something sorted out.
Every time it's a downpour, we're going to, wonder, are the waters going to come again? It's because, I mean, we've had 5 days of perpetual rain last week, and we were worried all the time. Is it going to happen again? I mean, if it did happen again, I think I'd just throw the keys away and leave.